As a hunter, how do you look at the difference in nutrition and food quality, something we're buying at the butcher versus something you've hunted? Because even within the animals, we've domesticated things. And I want to extrapolate later into fruits and vegetables. And these animals that we've domesticated, the way I understand it, it's relatively new in our history. So that food has changed versus something that's out in the wild that's likely still ancestral or closer to that. So talk about the difference there between something you're hunting, something you're buying, and the different qualities. And then I want to move into domestication of animals and plants.
So the it is just like everything else we've talked about. It's very, very complicated. Most people listening to this conversation would automatically say, okay, great. I don't care how grass-fed, grass-finished that beef is. A wild deer that you shot is going to be higher quality than that. Well, maybe. The wild deer that I shot has literally been finished on corn. Like they've literally been eating corn out of these fields, all summer, end of the summer into the fall. And in some cases, a lot of hunters around here will feed their deer corn, debate them ahead of time, and they've been on corn for weeks before they go out for hunting season, which is, it's kind of silly. And almost all that corn is genetically modified corn. So it's more complicated just saying that's a wild animal that I shot and brought it home, and therefore it is better for me. Now, I do think it's better for you on a lot of levels because you've had that connection. You've had that connection of harvesting that animal yourself. You've had not only the responsibility, but the opportunity to make use of that animal, take it apart properly. It's been in nobody else's hands but yours. So, what happens between an animal getting raised and shipped and then killed and then gutted and then butchered and then cut up and then packaged and then get shipped to the grocery store by the time that you get it. There's a lot of places, not only don't you see any of that, but there's a lot of places where something can get broken down or things can happen in that system. Here you have this animal in front of you that it's all on you. And there's something beautiful about that. And because of the way the USDA regulations work, I could raise a cow. I could birth the cow. I could raise the cow. I could bring it to the abattoir to get killed and the butcher to cut it up. But I legally can't get that entire cow back, even though it's my cow. Like there's parts of that cow that I'm legally not allowed to get, which is insane. But you can get the entire animal that you've hunted because it's sitting there in front of you. So I don't know the nutrient density and nutrient profile difference between a wild deer here in Maryland and a grass-fed, grass-finished cow up the road. I actually don't know that answer, but I love, when we talk about that diversity, I love the opportunity to include venison and ducks and geese and wild turkeys into my diet on a regular basis to complement all the other things coming from the grocery store. I also love the opportunity to, every time that I hunt, every time that I gut and butcher that animal, and then I'm actually reconnecting with, to me, everything that it means to be human. I'm connecting with my ancestors. I'm connecting with the world. I'm connecting with the environment. I'm connecting with that particular season. And I think that's incredibly important as well. And I have the opportunity to use that entire animal. Now we go a little bit far, like we brain tan, we make things out of bones. We do a lot of other stuff in addition to the food, but being a part of that process, you literally just can't put a price tag on. What's great about hunting in this country is that it transcends socioeconomic status. Like you go to Europe, and because of a number of different things, it's pretty much the elite get to hunt, because sometimes you have to own land in order to even get a hunting license or even a gun license. Guns are incredibly, it's a completely different model. Here, there's probably more people hunting in a lower socioeconomic status than there are at a higher socioeconomic status. So another part of, which I love that access, but another, I think, part of your question, if you're looking at, I don't know the difference in my corn finished corn finished wild deer that I'm shooting compared to a grass fed, grass finished cow up the road. But I can tell you that if your only access from a socioeconomic status is the literally worst CAFO beef on the planet, I can guarantee you that deer is 1,000 times better than that.
I never thought about it from the fact that these animals now are intruding upon our quote unquote land and eating our corn and stuff like that, and the negative influence that we're posing upon the animals. So interesting to bring that piece in.
In the middle of Manitoba, Canada, you're shooting a deer in the middle of the woods. That doesn't apply, right? But shooting a big, huge buck in the middle of Iowa next to the cornfield is that animal's diet in the last several weeks of its life is completely different.
The other aspect I'd like you to talk on is just the way we've genetically bred the animals. And the way I understand it, the domesticated cow has only been around for 10, 15,000 years. So this isn't the food, even from an animal perspective, that our ancestors would have eaten. And then it seems like it's even more extreme in the plant world with a lot of the fruits and the sugar content and how big they're getting. So for people that this could be all new to, assuming that these things that they're buying at the grocery store are, when they're in whole food form, are what our ancestors ate, let's clue people into the changes that have happened there.
That's a great point. So, just from a timeline perspective, our ancestors stood upright somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago. We started making tools and using tools to impact, and they impacted our diets at somewhere around 3.5 million years ago. 3.3, let's say 3.5 million years ago. I find that to be the first domestication event in the history of the planet. That's when we started to domesticate ourselves. And because of the cultural system we put ourselves in, a system that we have created, right? An environment we created by changing, by creating technology and doing these things, uh, we started to extract more nutrients from our food. It changed our diets, and our bodies changed in response to that. And right now we're in a place, again, we're so fully domesticated that we can't survive without some of these tools and some of these technologies. So the first domestication event was 3.5 million years ago. The next domestication event was somewhere, there's a lot of debate right now, but somewhere around 35,000 years ago. And that's the domestication of the dog. And the cool thing about the dog domestication is it looks like it was a co-domestication event. It wasn't like humans were like, hey, those dogs are super cool and we're going to bring them in and we're going to put a leash on them and maybe feed them. It seems like from everything that we can tell now that humans and dogs simultaneously realized the benefits of living in each other's world. And it was, again, a co-domestication event, not necessarily because we were eating dogs, right? Dogs and humans were doing a lot of things together at the same time. So 3.5 million years ago is a huge leap to 35,000 years ago. But then there's a huge leap to about 10 to 15,000 years ago, where we start seeing the first plant domestication events. Again, somewhere around 15,000 years ago, we see the earliest evidence of that. Most of our animal domestication happened between 8 to 10,000 years ago. So, and that's very, very recent. For some of us that, history to us is only several hundred years old. 10,000 years seems like a long time, but on the scale of millions of years, 10,000 years is nothing. So if you're thinking, another kind of maybe hallmark milestone that's important in this conversation is modern day Homo sapiens, us, right? Us with our body size, our brain size, us. Modern day Homo sapiens appear on the earth at about 300,000 years ago. So from 300,000 years ago until about 10,000 years ago, there was no domesticated animals in our food. None. And even when they did start to come in 10,000 years ago, it wasn't like this very big deal, and it wasn't a worldwide thing. It was only, in certain pockets of places. And the same thing, plants. There were no domesticated plants in our diets until about 15,000 years ago. So when you go through the groceries, if you go through the grocery store, and even if you're listening to that advice, just stay on the outskirts of only shop the outskirts of the grocery store, and you're pushing your cart along, and you're like, I'm a modern day hunter gatherer, and I'm picking up my lettuce, and I go over here and get my beef and my pork, and you're like, I'm doing the same thing. It completely different foods, completely different foods. Now, do they have some of the same nutrient profiles, and are we eating in an ancestrally appropriate way? Well, that's a different discussion. But don't be fooled into thinking that your caveman and cavewoman ancestors had access to the things that were in the grocery store, because they weren't eating those things. Those are very new, genetically modified things in our diets. And I don't mean we've been genetically modifying things for a very long time. I don't mean genetic modification like Roundup Ready, plants, like that kind of thing. Anytime that we selectively harvest and replant plants or do things we're like that, we are genetically modifying that population. So we've been genetically modifying for a very long time. But that spinach, those almonds, and that beef brisket were not available to our ancestors in the past.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
We are literally the only species on the planet that hires somebody else to tell us what to eat. And we are the sickest we've ever been, despite that, or probably as a result of that. If you are carnivore, if you are keto, if you are vegan, if you are vegetarian,